Howdy, neighbor. How's it going? This is some deal we got going on, huh? I mean, a virtual convention. Nothing I would ever imagined. Convention's always been my favorite time of year, though. I mean, you got the jackets, you got the contests, you got the themes. And speaking of themes, you got Stationed by Success. It kind of got me thinking. You know, you and I, we've always had a pretty good thing going. I mean, I'll borrow a cup of sugar, you'll borrow my weed eater, and not return it for 3.5 months. I've got a couple ideas I'd love to bounce off you if you got a sec. You got time? Awesome. Let's talk. You know, if you Google the word neighbor, you'll probably find a definition that has something to do with your proximity, like a next-door neighbor. But is that really all? Do we really have to limit our definition of that word to just those in our immediate area? I want to offer a different definition. I was talking to my friend Ivan Lutzenheiser. He's from Baker FFA. He said that a neighbor isn't just someone who lives next to you. A neighbor is someone who partakes in the same communities as you. I love this definition. It cuts out that need for proximity and replaces it with just people who share groups with you, whether that be by choice or by circumstance. For sake of analogy, let's call those groups neighborhoods. Every neighborhood has a few different types of neighbors. You got the hermit, you know, they're kind of always off on their own, away, secluded from the action of the neighborhood. Or you've got the overeager neighbor who's always, you know, in your face, got a plate of cookies for every holiday and a little too much interest in your personal life. Or the grumpy old dude next door, you don't know what you did, but he just can't stand the sight of you. Honestly, the closer you look at the neighborhood, it doesn't seem like all that great of a place to be. Save for the last neighbor. I mean, kind, generous, helpful, a few ways they could be described, but in a word, they're just neighborly. I've got a few thoughts on that word neighborly in a sec, but let's take a step back. What neighborhoods are you in? Sports team? Your FFA chapter? I mean, and if you really look at yourself, which neighbor are you? Are you the hermit? Do you kind of stay off to the side, not really involving yourself? Or are you maybe the overeager one who always wants to be up front and always wants more, more, more? All those extreme types of neighbors can be harmful to those around us and also ourselves. And that's why we need to strive for balance, to be neighborly. I think I've got being neighborly boiled down to 3 main parts, so just bear with me, it's not too complex. I can remember so many times when I was a kid running around the house with my siblings, whether it be with Legos or lightsabers or anything else that could potentially inflict pain. Inevitably, a loud "Mom" would ring out through the house, and, well, whenever she showed up to referee the scuffle that broke out, you could hear every time, without fail, "But I didn't mean to," as if that somehow excused the need for an apology. You see, it was never mine or my siblings' intention to harm the other one, but that didn't really matter. The impact it had on them was the same either way. Intent versus impact. It's a theme that carries through most, if not all, of our day-to-day interactions. It's something that's honestly easier said than done, but we've got to come to that conclusion that it doesn't really matter what we intend. All that really matters is how the other person is interpreting what we say or do. Do you ever just kind of decide what you think about somebody? I'll give you an example. Let's imagine I'm sitting in the library or something, and somebody I barely know will walk by. It's not something I'm proud of, but I've caught myself from time to time thinking, I don't like them. This is my critical heart. It's in times when I catch myself having these thoughts that I'm reminded of the parable of the speck and the plank. Imagine you're sitting across the table from a friend, and you can see there's this little piece of sawdust hanging out in their eye. It's everything you can do to not comment on how annoying it must be, or even just reach over there and just take care of it yourself. What's holding you back? Well, you have a big old 2x4 sticking out of your own eye. This story is just a great small reminder that, well, yes, there are things that are wrong in other people's lives and things that annoy us. but we have plenty of our own stuff to deal with first before we're in any position to comment on their spec. And that is why it is so important for us to check our critical hearts. That third element of being neighborly is, well, has to do with being a servant leader. If any of you have spent any amount of time in FFA, I'm sure that you've heard the word servant leader, but just in case you haven't, a servant leader is somebody who leads by putting the needs of others in front of their own. Coincidentally, that's also the trait of a pretty good neighbor. Putting the needs, and honestly, sometimes the wants of others in front of your own makes you into the type of neighbor everyone wants to have next door. I mean, that can look like something like just being willing to pick up the phone, or maybe more recently, keeping just a little bit of extra space to not spread sickness. Fred Rogers, often better recognized as just Mr. Rogers, has been a staple of children's television since the late 1960s. Every single one of his 912 episodes starts the same way, with that bright, peppy intro and him donning one of his many assorted sweaters. He never failed to bring a new nugget of wisdom week in and week out. You remember that station by success thing I mentioned earlier? Well, Fred had a little something to say about success. He said that there are 3 ways to ultimate success. The first is to be kind, the second is to be kind, and the third is to be kind. Now, I know it's cheesy, but just bear with me for a sec. At its core, all 3 of those elements of being neighborly boil down to kindness. I mean, you got intent versus impact, being kind with your words, checking your critical heart, being kind with your thoughts, or putting your neighbor before yourself, being kind with your actions. All 3 of these elements of kindness, of being neighborly, put us on a track that will ultimately station us by success. So where can intent versus impact be put into practice in our lives? I mean, checking our tone of voice, maybe making sure that we're coming across the way we think we are. Where can we check our critical heart? Maybe judgments based off first impressions, or assumptions without knowing the whole story? And where can we put our neighbor first? I mean, that could be like just picking where to eat, or giving up some of your free time to help them with homework. We're all called to station ourselves by success. But you can start by just doing your part, by just being neighborly. Well, hey, I've got to head out here, but before I go, you suppose you could do me a quick favor? If you get the chance, just maybe spread around what we talked about today. Well, thanks for hanging out. See you around, neighbor.
It's a beautiful...
Isaac, there's a reason why we call you the grandpa of the team. And that's not just because you're a grump, but it's also because in every interaction that you do, you bring wisdom to the team. You make us grounded, and you keep us sane. Thank you for all the car rides throughout the summer, even though you did get a speeding ticket in my car. Thank you, Isaac, for your year of service.
Montana FFA, I want to present you your 2019-2020 Montana FFA State Second Vice President from Ritchie, Isaac Sponheim.
I have always wanted to have a neighbor just like you. I've always wanted to live in a neighborhood with you, so let's make the most.